Coming up on this edition of the PHNX Diamondbacks podcast, we have the ZiPS projections. We're going to talk about what the ZiPS tell us about the 2025 Arizona Diamondbacks. Plus, our special guest, Jack Sommers, has the perfect plan for what the Diamondbacks should do this offseason. We're going to discuss that as well. Don't go anywhere. We'll be live right here in 30 seconds. Welcome into today's edition of the PHNX D-Back Show, coming to you live from Studio K, presented by Circle K. Join the Inner Circle for free by downloading the Circle K app today. Terms and conditions apply at participating locations. Visit circlek.com for details. Well, my name is not Derek Montilla. I am Jesse Friedman, driving the show today here on PHNX D-Backs. Derek, of course, learned that we were talking about the ZiPS projections on today's show. And naturally, he ran off to probably Gila River Resorts and Casinos or somewhere where he could have some actual fun instead of nerding out with us here on the show. So instead of having Derek with us today, we have the one and only Jack Sommers, who does a great job covering the Diamondbacks for Diamondbacks on SI. And honestly, I can't really think of anyone better to nerd out about projections for the 2025 Diamondbacks than Jack Sommers himself.
It's a geek fest. Thanks for inviting me. I know I'm in the right spot.
It is a geek fest. It's going to be a great time. Well, it just happened yesterday. Some of you might have seen it. The Diamondbacks ZiPS projections were released over on FanGraphs. And usually we don't get these projections this early. I guess the Diamondbacks won the ZiPS lottery and were the first team to have their projections released. So, I mean, winning the ZiPS lottery, that's the same thing as basically winning the 2025 World Series, right, Jack? It's basically the same thing.
It's really random how he sends them out. He doesn't send them out alphabetically. And
no.
It's been like this big mystery trying to figure out what his criteria is to decide who comes out when. So it was quite a shock to see D-backs up first.
Yeah, I think it's random, I want to say. I've never been able to find any rhyme or reason whatsoever. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and jump into the ZiPS projections and what they tell us about the Diamondbacks in 2025. But I guess before we get there, I do want to talk about just what projection systems are in general. I think a lot of people don't really understand exactly what these projections are trying to do. Poor Dan Szymborski, who is the very brilliant mind behind all of this, takes a lot of heat on social media because his projections aren't always right. And then people come attacking him on social media like, what happened, Dan? I thought you were supposed to be good at this. But Jack, maybe you can lend some light on exactly what the goal of something like ZiPS is.
Well, the number one tenet to remember with ZiPS is Dan Szymborski hates your team.
Correct. Yep, that's a great starting point.
No, look, they're projections of where the player stands today and where he might be going.
Yeah.
So they use multi-year data. They weight most recent years more heavily. Dan's been doing this for 25 years. And over time, he's been able to incorporate a lot of different new tools and data that's become available. So all the StatCast tracking data and all these new things that we've just really had exposure to the last few years, those have worked their way into his system. But projections are not predictions. They're just a baseline for where a guy's at.
Right.
One thing I can tell you is that having worked in the Diamondbacks front office, they use projections. They're definitely part of the plan. But a major league team is also, of course, heavily dependent on their scouts and their coaches and what they see in a player. And a good front office melds the two together. So, nobody should be relying on these exclusively. But if you ignore them out of hand, and say, well, we're all geeks, you're missing the forest from the trees.
Yeah, and I think the track record of ZiPS, I'll just say real quick, it seems to be pretty impressive. The goal is not to be accurate 100% of the time, or even like 70% of the time, if you project that a guy's going to have 4.4 wins above replacement or whatever for next season, the chance of you being exactly correct it's almost impossible, really. But the idea is to be sort of right in the middle, where you're going to underestimate 50% of the time, you're going to overestimate 50% of the time. But these projections give us an idea of kind of what that middle ground, what the most likely outcomes might look like.
I think the other thing too, and Dan writes this, he every year when ZiPS comes out, he has a article that explains exactly how it's run. You can find that on FanGraphs.
Yeah.
If you just look under Dan Szymborski, I think he put it out on the 12th. But I'm just going to read one quick section that he wrote. He said, even if inserting my opinion would improve a specific projection, I'm philosophically opposed to doing so. ZiPS is most useful when people know that it's purely data-based, not some unknown mix of data and my opinion. So sadly, he does not hate your team. You can't lean on that crutch if you don't like the projection.
Well, with that said, let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to start on the position player side, but first of all, we can look at this helpful graphic that just shows the big picture. This is what Dan has. If you're wondering what all of these numbers on the screen are, these are wins above replacement projections. So when you see Carroll in right field at 4.3, that is saying that Diamondbacks are projected to get 4.3 wins above replacement from that position. Of course, Carroll getting the majority of the reps there, and the same idea sort of across the board here. We're going to start on the position player side. Jack, I guess I know you've poured through all these numbers. What stands out to you?
Well, the first thing that stood out to me, as we were talking about earlier, was when I sort the projections by OPS, 3 of the top 6 players are no longer on the team. They're free agents. Christian Walker and Bell, who are only 5 points separated by OPS, by the way. And
it's crazy.
Of course, Jock Peterson. So that's a lot of offense to replace right there. Randall Grichuk, interestingly, only has about 709 projected OPS. So the other thing is that there's only 2 players in the vicinity of 800 OPS. Ketel at 833 and Corbin Carroll at 794. So, there's a lot of slugging and a lot of offense that they need to make up.
Well, you mentioned Ketel there as well as Corbin. I guess let's maybe start with those guys. Corbin, I think his projection is especially interesting if we can pull up his projection from ZiPS. Obviously, 2024 was not a great season for Corbin Carroll. And you look at these projections for 2025, Jack, and they don't jump off the page. These numbers are really not all that different from where he ended the 2024 season, projecting at 256, 345, 449 slash line with 21 homers and 4.3 wins above replacement. This is sort of a repeat of Carroll's 2024 season, give or take.
Yeah, they weight the most recent performance, right? And It's really important to understand that Corbin, actually, his kind of downturn in numbers started in mid-June of 23. So they go back a year and a half and come up with similar numbers to that.
Right.
I think from June 14th forward in 23 to the end of the year, his OPS was only about like 785. So, that first half or first 2.5 months of 23 obviously should maybe be more reflected because of his age and trajectory. Bottom line with Corbin is how's he going to respond to the swing changes he made and the corrections he finally made last year, and will that carry forward?
So Corbin last season, or I guess this past season, was at a 749 OPS. That's where he finished off. So they have him at a 789 for 2025. So a bit of an uptick there. I guess going to Ketel Marte, obviously Ketel has won quite a bit of hardware lately. It feels like he is nominated for an award or wins an award basically every single day. And this is his projection for 2025 at 270, 345, 449 slash line and 24 homers. Jack, my guess is that most people looking at this are like, that's it? Ketel just had, a 950 OPS or whatever it was and hit 36 bombs. This seems like a bit of a downturn from what we saw this season.
Yeah, actually, I think his OPS might be a little higher than that from what I downloaded. They have him, from what I downloaded, was at 833 OPS. It's 350, 483.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, what we did is we we combined Ketel's batting average and Corbin Carroll's on base and slugging. So that's my bad. Yes, this is supposed to say 270, 350, 483. Which is definitely a higher projection for sure. I think the 24 homers is accurate. But even so, like 270, 350, 483, that's still a fairly far cry from the player that Ketel was in 2024.
Maybe I digress a little bit here. It looks to me like Dan is projecting a somewhat depressed offensive environment for 2025.
We'll see that when we get to the pitching side. Some of these ERAs are quite low.
But also, like when you compare it to Steamer projections, basically his OPS projections are lower, like 20 points across the board.
Yeah,
on average, than what Steamer has. And people should keep in mind that Steamer and ZiPS combine the average of the two to create FanGraphs depth charts projections. So they do combine those two.
Right.
So I think, when you look at this, you have to take into account that he's lowering the league environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. Other guys that stand out here to me, Geraldo Perdomo is one name I'd like to take a look at. We talk a lot year after year about how Geraldo Perdomo's baseball savant page is not usually the prettiest. Although there are some things that are very pretty. The chase rate, the whiff rate, those numbers are always extraordinary for Geraldo Perdomo. The batted ball, hard contact stuff, not so much. This is his projection for 2025 at 248, 340, 355, slash line 6 homers and 2.1 wins above replacement. In some ways, Jack, this is certainly below where he was in 2024. But in some ways, I'm surprised that ZiPS doesn't look at some of those underlying batted ball numbers and be a little bit more skeptical of Perdomo. Like to project him for a 340 on base percentage, that's a really valuable player. And I guess I can understand, say what you will about the batted ball numbers, but Perdomo has been basically that guy here for the last couple of years, spanning almost 1,000 plate appearances. It seems like maybe the computers are starting to buy in that Perdomo is just able to outperform those numbers.
I have more upsides when I was 24 than I do now. I think that's part of it. I mean, certainly the aging curve comes into play here.
Sure.
As he gets a little older, they're probably projecting him to hit the ball with a little bit more authority. 695 may not look like much, but it's a 94 OPS plus. It's just scraping the bottom of league average for a good defensive shortstop. That's a really valuable player.
Other guys, real quick, Jake McCarthy, if we can pull his up, we'll do a couple of these rapid fire. 266, 329, 389, 8 homers, 1.6 wins above replacement. If we flip over to Alek Thomas, I think these are two guys that we're constantly comparing back and forth. Not a huge difference in total value. They have Alek Thomas at a 252, 303, 400 slash line. That's an OPS just over 700, 10 homers, and almost the exact same WAR figure at 1.7. This is one of the big questions that the Diamondbacks are going to have to grapple with this offseason, Jack, is which of these guys do you value more? Are you willing to trade one of them? And if you are willing to trade one of them, which of these guys do you trade?
I had somebody ask me on Blue Sky today, which the exact same question.
Sure.
And, my response was, depends on what the other team wants. It's not what the D-backs want to get rid of. It's what teams are interested in which player.
Right.
And a lot of times the way this happens is some teams, hitting coach or scout may say, hey, I can fix Alek Thomas. I can help him figure out how to get the ball off the ground and tap into his clearly better power.
Right.
And they may convince a GM like, hey, take a chance on this guy. I can fix this. Other teams like the Royals, they're looking for a leadoff hitter that gets on base and can run, and they want it now. So because they have a window. So maybe they'd be more interested in Jake McCarthy. Sure. So it really depends on who's calling and what they need. Yeah,
it's a great point. I think we often forget that when we're thinking about trades. It goes both ways. It's a two-way street trying to make a trade with another team. Pavin Smith, his projection is significant because as of right now, he is your everyday first baseman. He is projected to slash 248, 333, 407. I think this works out to a 105 OPS plus, something like that. 13 homers, 1 win above replacement. Jack, obviously 2024 was a huge step in the right direction for Pavin. Not the biggest sample size in the world, but it was impressive. I don't know. How do you feel about this? Does this make you feel like Pavin is deserving of some everyday reps at first base, or does this maybe steer you in a different direction?
Well, here's where you need to get into the subjective, right? Dan even mentioned this in his article about the D-backs. I mean, it's an underwhelming projection. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And it's a little hard to hand wave away the previous 1,000-plus plate appearances before the 140 successful plate appearances he had in 2024. So that's what's happening there, right? But, eyeball test, we watched every game, every at-bat. He looked like a different player, right? I mean, he was elevating the ball with authority.
Yes.
And that's what looked different. Like, you can't just look at flat exit velocity. The guy was hitting the same exit or even a little bit better, but the launch angle was higher, right? He was hitting the ball in the air more. They weren't just flat line drives and ground balls. He was booming some fly balls. And so that's what we saw, and if we can get more of that, then that's something that's hard for the projection system to pick out.
Sure.
And because of the sample size. Like if he did that over 600 plate appearances, then ZiPS would be booming for Pavin Smith. But it is a small sample size.
Well, we all know that if Pavin were taking all of his plate appearances against Justin Verlander in 2025, then he'd basically be Barry Bonds. So we'll see how many PAs he gets against Verlander next season.
Right.
Real quick, to finish things out here on the position player side, I sort of expected calculations like this, projection systems, to not be so high on Geno Suarez. And sure enough, this is what we have for ZiPS in 2025, a 233, 312, 414 slash line, 23 homers, 2.3 wins above replacement. This is still a valuable player. I think it is a player that you can argue is worth the $16 million that the Diamondbacks are paying him. However, it is not the Geno Suarez that we saw in 2024, specifically in the second half of 2024.
Yeah, I mean, again, here you have to hope that the subjective comes into play. He altered his pregame routine, tapped into some different ways of approaching. He's got that first half, second half deal going on. So maybe if they can help him overcome that, then the year-on numbers will look better. But he's getting older, right?
Yeah.
Father time.
Yeah, undefeated. Who else do we still have? Lourdes Gurriel Jr., I know Groundhog Mama's interested in what his numbers look like. For Lourdes, we have a 272, 319, 427 slash line for 2025, 15 homers, 1.6 wins above replacement. It does feel like the numbers for Lourdes are kind of moving in the wrong direction, but not at an alarming rate. I think Lourdes is making, $14 million this year, something like that. And this is, you can live with paying this player $14 million.
Yeah, for me, the only caveat, and it's not anything that's put out there, but just something I've been looking about, and recently Jake Oliver for us wrote about it.
Right.
Is his issues with handling the fastball last year. His numbers on fastballs really took a big dip.
Yeah.
So, hopefully that's a one-off because, if a guy's not catching up to fastballs and hitting fastballs hard, sooner or later they start cheating. And once they start cheating, then pitchers pick up on that, and then you start to see those really awkward swings and trying to dig sliders out of the left-hand batter's box and stuff like that.
Then you become Evan Longoria from the second half of 2023. It was a little rough. Groundhog Mama says, can you do a show where you compare the 2024 ZiPS against 2024 actual final numbers, which is a fantastic idea. We'll have to do that at some point. Gabriel Moreno finishing things out here in terms of the starting position players, 284, 357, 408 slash line for him, 7 homers, 3.3 WAR. It's a pretty big number. They're only projecting 373 plate appearances here, which I think is fairly realistic. Gabby has gotten hurt the last couple of seasons. You're never going to play a catcher every single day. This is a pretty healthy projection for a guy who's maybe playing 2/3 of your games.
Yeah, ZiPS loves Gabby Moreno.
It really does.
That here, because he doesn't have a ton of major league plate appearances, those really big minor league numbers that he put up still weigh a little bit more heavily, right? The further you get away from your minor league track record and replace that with major league at-bats, then it doesn't count so much. But if you look at his career, I don't think he's got, he's nowhere near 1,000 yet. I think he's like 7-something, 800, whatever.
Right.
So that's a big part of it right there.
Well, we're going to get to some more ZiPS projections here in just a couple of minutes. What does ZiPS have to say about Erod? What does ZiPS have to say about Jordan Montgomery? Some of the bench bats that the Diamondbacks have that could be really important in 2025. We're going to get into all of that on the other side of this break, so don't go anywhere. Well, if Derek were here, he would brag about his home ownership journey, starting with Desert Financial Credit Union and the extremely low interest rate that may never be achievable again in American history. But Desert Financial was certainly a big part of his life, and it can be a big part of yours as well. One of my favorite things about Desert Financial Credit Union is that they have exclusive debit cards that are branded with your favorite sports teams. So if you want your debit card to have an Arizona Cardinals logo on it, for example, that's something that they can do for you. If you're a sports fan, it's supposed to take up your entire life, right? It's supposed to be all encompassing. And that's something that Desert Financial can do for you. Look to Desert Financial for checking and savings accounts, mortgages, loans, credit cards, investment options, and more. Join a credit union that is committed to giving back to the community and sharing success with its members. When you open a free checking account online, get $200 in bonuses, and you can get started by visiting desertfinancial.com/200. Also want to tell you about our friends over at Chicken and Pickle. Jack, how's your pickleball game?
Non-existent.
Non-existent? All right. Well, mine is basically non-existent too. I've played once at a staff party here at PHNX, and it was not pretty. But if you were into pickleball, which I know many people out there are, and I aspire to be one of those people, Chicken and Pickle is absolutely the place to go. Not only do they have great options for playing pickleball, but they also have amazing food as well. It is a great place to hang out. We've had a whole bunch of events, a whole bunch of PHNX events out there. It's always a great place to hang out. They also have a ping pong table, which is maybe at least one of my favorite amenities on the property, because what I lack in pickleball skill, I very much make up for with my ping pong game. So
they just need to shrink pickleball for you, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the pickleball, I have to move my legs in order to play pickleball. It's too difficult. But head over to chickenandpickle.com to see all the fun that you can have at their Glendale location. All right, and with that, we jump back into our ZiPS projections here, Jack. I guess we'll start with some of the bench guys on the position player side real quick, then we'll jump into the pitchers. Adrian Del Castillo, I think, is an important name here. We don't have a fancy graphic for Adrian Del Castillo, but I can read out. His projected slash line is 238, 307, 396. That works out to a 94 OPS plus. Jack, those numbers are a far cry from what we saw from Del Castillo in 2024.
Yeah, we talked about this in the press box, right? Which is basically what we're doing here is just geeking out like we do in the press box all day. It's a lot of fun. But we really were shocked to see just how ill-supported his batting line was by the underlying batted ball metrics.
Yeah.
They just weren't there. And I think that's what's happening with this, plus the fact that he simply doesn't have enough, 80-something major league plate appearances. So it's a lot of regression to the mean. They got to plug in, this is what an average minor leaguer does when you only got 85 major league plate appearances. So I think that's what's going on here. My advice would be to temper expectations. Adrian came up. He was hotter than a house on fire for the first 40 plate appearances. But man, did those strikeouts pile up, and the contact grew a lot weaker.
Yeah.
A couple of good moments after that, but for the most part, his last 40 or so plate appearances, not too good.
Yeah, very much agree there. He did have some epic moments. I rember him tying a game with a 3-run homer in Tampa Bay. I remember him hitting a walk-off home run against Jeff Hoffman, if I'm not mistaken, in one of his first games in the big leagues. And he also had that home run in Miami when he had a whole bunch of friends and family in the ballpark. The storylines for Adrian Del Castillo were off the charts. He was a lot of fun to watch in a lot of ways. But yeah, the team clearly had concerns about his defense. And for people who were puzzled at why the Diamondbacks chose Jose Herrera over him toward the end of the season, it was clear that the defense was a big factor there. That's not to say that Jose Herrera is necessarily a Gold Glove caliber defender, but Adrian Del Castillo struggled a little bit defensively, I think in all facets. So that'll be an interesting thing to monitor going into 2025. Also on the bench side, Jordan Lawler is another name that I want to touch on real quick. His projection, Jack, is not particularly, does not look particularly good. 226, 302, 341. That's a 79 OPS plus. Obviously, we haven't seen Lawler much in the majors. He had that cup of coffee toward the end of the 2023 season, and the numbers then were not particularly good.
This is strikeout driven. He's striking out too much.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a good young player. He's eventually going to hit. Whether or not he's able to reduce his strikeouts enough to get to that talent in the major leagues early on is to be TBD. I think the other thing I'll just add here, as we're talking about Lawler, I mean, if you look at the whole gamut of guys that are likely to be on, get certain amount of major league at-bats this year, whether it's Del Castillo, Lawler, and then you throw in, Jorge Barrosa, Tristan English, Blaze Alexander, Tim Tawa. I mean, these are names in AAA that are all going to see some level of major league performance this year.
Very well could.
And, they're projected between 630 and 646 OPS. They got a lot of holes to fill on offense.
Yeah.
There isn't a impact minor leaguer coming that you can just say, oh, plug this guy in and he's going to, hit above average all year long. They don't have that guy.
Well, Geno Groover is pretty close here, Jack. They've got Geno Groover at 255, 315, 402, a 99 OPS plus. So just a tick below average. That is a pretty bullish projection for a guy who's, has not even played much in Double A at this point. But yeah, some interesting names to monitor on the position player side. I think the biggest takeaway there is that, the Diamondbacks have some holes to fill. You lose, your number 3 hitter, at least against righties, in Jock Peterson. You lose your cleanup hitter in Christian Walker. Things look quite a bit different. At the same time, I would still say, I think the core of a pretty good offense is there. It's not like if the Diamondbacks were to, even if the Diamondbacks did nothing this offseason to upgrade the offense, I don't think this is like the 25th ranked offense in the game. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle, and with some additions, you could maybe push it back toward the top. Switching gears over to the pitching side, I guess I don't know. Who do you want to start with here, Jack? There's a lot of interesting names to get to.
I think we got to start with number 1, the ace.
Okay, all right. Zac Gallen, a 3.45 ERA projected for 2025. Strikeout rate of 23.2%, which would be, I believe, the lowest of his career by a fairly wide margin. 7.6% walk rate projected, 3.75 FIP, and 2.9 wins above replacement. What do we think?
It's interesting that, and we'll be talking about this when we talk about a couple of the other guys, the gap between the ERA and the FIP. Watching Zac all year, I mean, what did we see? How did he do that? He somehow got through 5 innings and only gave up 1 or 2 runs despite all the walks or all the hits, right? How many times did we see that? His pitchability, clearly, I mean, he's a veteran. He knows how to get out of trouble. And I think that's being captured here in this projection.
I agree. This is sort of a pretty similar season to what he had this past year and even in 2023, an ERA in the mid 3s. No huge surprises there for me. Where the surprises really set in, Jack, are, at least for me, was with Eduardo Rodriguez. If we look at his page real quick, this feels bold. It's only 105 1/3 innings. I guess there's some durability questions that are probably feeding into that, understandably so. But a 3.67 projected ERA for Eduardo Rodriguez. Strikeout and walk rates right around league average, 1.6 wins above replacement. I don't know about you, Jack, but the pitcher that we saw in 2024 did not look like someone who was maybe going to put up these kind of numbers in 2025.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. I can't figure. I tried to peel back what might be behind this, and I don't have a good answer. Just give it the old finger in the air.
I will say, Eduardo, if you look at some of his underlying stats from 2024, and it was a small sample, right? He made 10 starts, something like that. His FIP was in the mid 4s. I know his ERA was up over 5. But he did bounce back nicely kind of toward the end of the season, looked a little bit more like the pitcher that you would expect him to be. And yeah, I guess this is a case of ZiPS just not reading too much into Erod.
Right. I mean,
not being great.
He had a 3.30 ERA, I think, in 2023.
Right. Yeah.
In a lot more innings. And if you got to remember, these are weighted, most recent heavily, but it's also a sample size issue, right? What do you have? 50 innings last year, had 150, 60 the year before. And so 2023 is certainly informing this projection when he had a 3.3 ERA. But I think his FIP was almost a run higher, right?
Yeah, I think it was. Well, if the Erod projection is surprising to you, just wait till you see Jordan Montgomery's projection for 2025. Here we go. A 3.93 ERA after he was in the 6.5 range in 2024. Strikeout rate, not great at 18.7%. Walk rate, 7.5%. But a FIP of 3.98 and wins above replacement at 1.6, basically the same as Erod. This one, Jack, feels almost impossible to me. But I guess there's a chance that Montgomery bounces back, and there's a lot more history of him looking like this pitcher than there is history of him looking like what we saw in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, initial first glance, it does not pass the smell test. Something smelled. But look, the odds are he's not going to be on the team anyway.
That is a very fair point. Based on the reporting we've gotten, it seems like things are trending in that direction.
Although Mike, when pushed, is there a scenario where Jordan Montgomery is pitching for the Diamondbacks in 2025?
Right. And
he said yes.
Which I feel like he kind of has to say that in some ways. I don't know if you can say that there's no way a guy returns to your team in 2025. Sticking with the rotation here, honestly, all these numbers look pretty good. We can just keep on going. Brandon Pfaadt, if we go to him next, 159 in a third innings projected, a 3.84 ERA. That is pretty darn good. 24.2% strikeout rate, 5.5% walk rate. His walk and strikeout rates are the best of anyone in this starting group. 2.3 wins above replacement. I think this is the season that you hope to get from Brandon Pfaadt in 2025. He hasn't really shown the ability to put that together yet.
This is actually a good opportunity to emphasize that all of these projections include a great deal of regression to the mean.
Sure.
So last year, Pfaadt had a FIP, a run lower than his ERA, give or take. Right. That's a huge gap.
All of the other nerdy peripherals like expected ERA and xFIP, I think we're in the exact same range.
So no projection system is going to project that kind of gap.
Yeah.
Right. They can't. I mean, it's an outlier type situation. So you're never going to see a projection system come up and say, well, here is a 3.75 FIP, but 4.75 ERA. So Dan mentioned in his article how the projection system still doesn't believe in Pfaadt's ability to prevent runs to his underlying peripherals.
Right. But the difference is so much smaller than what we saw in 2024.
And that's due to the regression to the mean. But within the scope of these projection systems, 0.22 difference is actually a fairly large difference. And it's kind of like the anti-Zac Gallen.
Sure.
Where, what do you have, 3.45, 3.71?
Yeah, he's outperforming the underlying numbers.
So those, when you get over 0.2 difference between FIP and ERA in either direction in a projection system, that's actually a big number. Most of the time it's 0.1 to 1 something or less.
Merrill Kelly, let's see what we got there. It feels like projection systems never really have bought into Merrill Kelly being a top flight starter. And that is sort of the case here again, a 3.87 ERA, strikeout rate just under 20%, walk rate around 7%, a 4.24 FIP, which is significantly higher. So this is someone that the projection systems are starting to buy into Merrill Kelly outperforming those underlying numbers. But even so, a 3.87 ERA, I mean, we've seen Merrill do better than that in the past.
Another factor here is ZiPS buys into the team defense.
Sure.
Which is definitely a factor here with these.
Yeah, that's a great point. Ryne Nelson is the other member of that 6 starter group that we have right now that we haven't touched on. These numbers also pretty decent. A 4 ERA right on the dot, 19.2% strikeout rate, 6.5% walk rate, similar to Merrill Kelly with those numbers. FIP of 4.14, so they actually have him outperforming his FIP just a little bit here, and 1.6 wins above replacement from Ryne Nelson. I mean, zooming out here, Jack, this is 6 starters, 6 starting pitchers with projected ERAs of 4 or below.
Right.
That is a dramatic difference from where this team was in 2024.
So I think, again, I got to point out that if you go to Steamer, and remember, Steamer and ZiPS 50-50 make up FanGraphs depth chart projection.
Like the projected standings that people are probably familiar with. It's
their
the
depth
recipe
chart
includes both.
Depth chart standings, all of that.
Yeah.
And, Steamer has only one pitcher with a sub-4 ERA, Zac Gallen at 3.93.
Interesting.
Everybody else is over 4. Nelson's at 4.52. So part of that is what we talked about before. The league run environment's different. So when FanGraphs comes out with their final, in February, when they come out with their blast,
Sure.
and they put their FanGraphs depth charts out, you're going to see, they call it FGDC, FanGraphs depth chart. There's going to be an average of these two. So if Zach's at 3.93 and 3.45, whatever the average is of those two, that's what he's going to come in at. So just keep that in mind when you look at these, because it's all going to be balanced out.
Other guys worth mentioning on the pitching side, I guess the bullpen at large, if we can pull up the kind of big picture ZiPS graphic that has all of the different positions and whatnot. They have, I guess they total up all of the reliever production and they come out with 4.8 WAR. That seems like a really big number to me, Jack. I don't think we've seen a Diamondbacks bullpen projected for 4.8 WAR ever? Question mark. Like I don't think I've ever seen that from this team.
Yeah, I mean the components are there for a pretty darn good bullpen, health willing.
Yeah.
And, as you've talked about here on the show, plenty, if you throw in, a top flight closer to that mix, then you really have something. But these are definitely encouraging numbers. I mean, you got Justin Martinez and AJ Puck. I mean, they're relatively young, and coming off outstanding seasons. And then you have a baseline level of competency behind them with Ginkel, Thompson, and Mantiply. You just got to hope that they're healthy and don't wear down.
Yeah. I guess in terms of starting pitching depth, we all know that for as good as those numbers looked for the Diamondbacks top 6 starters on the depth chart, it's going to take more than 6 starters to get through 162. And something that I was honestly shocked by looking at these ZiPS projections is that almost all of the Diamondbacks depth starters project pretty favorably. Christian Mena, a 4.09 ERA. Like, goodness, would you take that if Christian Mena came up and had a 4.09 ERA? Slade Ciccone, whose ERA was well into the 6 range last year, a 4.14 projected ERA. Tommy Henry, who we hardly even saw in the majors, really struggled when he was up with the big league team, 4.28. Yu-Min Lin, who's pitched 1 game in AAA, 4.21. Blake Walston, 4.15. Yilbert Diaz, 4.20. According, ZiPS seems to buy into the Diamondbacks as having extraordinary starting pitching depth, as far as I could tell. And I'm not sure I fully buy into that, Jack. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's an optimistic viewpoint. I think where you go here is you have so many guys. So all you need is a couple of them to be decent, right? So if you just rattled off, 6 names or whatever, if give me 2 of them being good. Don't ask me which 2, right? We're just wait and see.
Yeah, if these ZiPS projections actually were to happen, the upgrade for Diamondbacks pitching in 2025 would be enormous. I mean, these numbers are, I know you mentioned the run environment seems to be a little diminished with these projections, and we should factor that in, but this is a Diamondbacks pitching staff that is worlds better than what we saw in 2024.
Yeah, I think, just as I look at the projections that have come out, what I see is kind of what you see is an offense that probably drops to the 10 to 15 range unless they do a really good job of filling some of the gaps, and a defense pitching that probably rises off the floor from 27th, up into 15 to 20 range.
Yeah. It would be a very different team than what we saw in 2024, where the offense was amazing and the pitching was terrible. But there is a version of that where you take some strides forward on the pitching side and you take a step back on offense. and you could wind up with a team that is just as good or maybe even better if things go the way the Diamondbacks want them to. Well, I don't know what the Diamondbacks should do this offseason, and you might not feel like you know either. But Jack Sommers, he knows. He came up with a plan for what the Diamondbacks should do this offseason that is comprehensive. We're going to dive into that on the other side of this break, so don't go anywhere. Well, one of my favorite partners here at PHNX is Branded Bills. If you are in the market for some swag, then Branded Bills is definitely the way to go. They have partnerships with ASU and U of A as part of their campus collection. I, of course, have come out lately as being a big U of A guy, even though I attended neither university, and hate on Tucson as a city regularly on this show, but somehow I'm a big U of A guy. I have one of their U of A hats. It's great. They're beautiful. Branded Bills has you covered with the best custom headwear. Start your order and their dedicated team will help you create the exact custom apparel that you need. Whether you need snapbacks, truckers, fitteds, beanies, or tees, they have you covered with performance and style. I am trying to get one of their Arizona State hats as well right now because those are beautiful and extraordinary, and you should get one if you have not already. You can head over to brandedbills.com and use code PHNX for 20% off your first order.
Jesse, I'll get you one if you put that U of A hat somewhere else.
I'll think about it.
Yeah.
That's a fair proposal. Also want to tell you guys about our friends over at Circle K, which is where I went yesterday after I finished the show because I needed gas, and regularly Circle K has some of the cheapest gas you'll find anywhere in the Valley. They're also, of course, America's thirst stop. As I mentioned from the top of the show, you can join the Inner Circle, their free membership program. It's great. You can save money on things inside, and you also save money on gas, and it is free. So why would you not do that? Saving 25 cents per gallon for your first 5 fill-ups. That's also a pretty nice perk. So yeah, join the Inner Circle for free by downloading the Circle K app today. Terms and conditions apply at participating locations. Visit circlek.com for details. And Jack, it is now time for you to tell us the future. Tell us the future that, I guess maybe not the future, but the future that you have envisioned for this Diamondbacks team. You had an article over on your site, Diamondbacks on SI, where you basically created an off-season plan for the Diamondbacks. One route that they could take this winter to get this team in at least a good position in 2025. And you came at it from a realistic angle. You're not running a $250 million payroll or something like that. You operated within the constraints that it appears the Diamondbacks are dealing with. So yeah, I guess, can you just sort of walk us through what you have in mind?
So there were actually 2 articles. The first one I wrote was free agency leaves a huge hole in the Diamondbacks lineup.
Sure.
The 5 free agent hitters that are leaving this team, unless they bring any of them back, accounted for 69 of the team's 210 homers and 244 of their RBIs and a 126 OPS plus. I mean, basically a third of your power production and 1,700 plus plate appearances. Poof,
right.
Gone.
Yeah.
It's a big hole. Mm-hmm. You know, how much of that hole is going to be covered by Adrian Del Castillo, Pavin Smith, and, maybe Jordan Lawler or whomever.
After looking at the ZiPS for those 3 guys, it's hard to be
not very much
too optimistic. Yeah.
So, that, and they understand that. I mean, the team is very clear-eyed about what they have to do. At the same time, we work within financial parameters. Really, from the get-go, it's been fairly evident that the team's going to probably be around the same payroll. Even before Mike said that on the radio the other day, it's been fairly evident that that's going to be the case.
Right.
They finished last year, initial numbers showed like $172 million. When you add in the buyouts, the option buyouts, it might have jumped a little over 175. So give or take, we can kind of figure out where they ended the year and how they budget. So, kind of calling the appeal to authority, I did work for the front office many years ago, 15 years ago, still the same owner at the time. And some of the ways they do this accounting, what they're looking at isn't opening day payroll.
Right.
They have to look forward. They have to look at not just current guaranteed contracts and ARB estimates, but they have to look at the whole entire 40-man roster, what they got to pay those guys. They have to bring account for injury call-ups, right?
Right.
So when you do all that, I came up with 144, and you did the same exercise. You said you had 145, right?
Yeah, something in that range for sure. So yeah, it's helpful. It gives us an idea of sort of how much wiggle room the Diamondbacks have. If you're shooting for 170, something in that range, then you have roughly $25 million to spend. Although I know that the first step in your plan, or at least one of the steps, is to try to create a little bit more financial flexibility.
Right. So the numbers I had in my article, which, by the way, was just simply titled Proposing a Simple, Realistic Plan for the Diamondbacks Offseason. You can find that on si.com/MLB/Diamondbacks.
It is very simple. It's
Diamondbacks on SI. Had to get a plug in there. Sorry. All right. So, I had $26 million available, right? 144, 26 brings you to 170.
Sure.
Plus or minus. So maybe they go a few million more flexibility than that. But for the sake of the article and sake of this discussion, that's where I was at. First things first, they need to move Jordan Montgomery as much of his salary as they can. Nothing revolutionary in that idea. I think, from the beginning of the offseason, even before Ken's comments, everyone's been assuming that they're going to try to do that.
Right.
So I had them being able to move half, 11 of the $22.5 million. I believe that if Jordan Montgomery was a free agent today, he's going to get a 1-year, $12 million deal.
Yeah.
I mean, he's still a veteran with a long track record. There's got to be half a dozen teams out there easily that can afford to take a 1-year flyer on him at $12 million.
Yeah, agreed.
So I put it at 11. So that brought $26 million up to $37 million.
So you've got $37 million to play with this offseason.
That's important step one of the plan.
Right.
And I would look for the Diamondbacks to try to do that as soon as possible, because they don't really know who they can sign and what they can spend until that piece is taken care of.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So the next thing, and this obviously feeds off of that massive hole in the lineup, they need to bring Jock Peterson back. Now, Jock turned down a $14 million option.
Right.
So it's certainly going to take at least that or more to bring him back. And he's looking for a multi-year deal. But he's limited. He can't play defense. He can't hit righties. Can't hit lefties.
Yeah. There's a cap on his value. We've talked about that a lot here. Yeah.
I don't see a lot of teams rushing out there to give him a 3-year, $45 million deal.
Mm-hmm.
So what I proposed was bringing Jock back at 2 years, $32 million guaranteed. That may be like $14 million salary and a 2-year buyout of a third year, $16 million option or something like that. So 2 years, $32 million guaranteed, average annual 16. They need Jock's left-handed power bat back at DH. They really do.
It is hard to imagine what the middle of the lineup looks like without him.
Yeah, I mean, everyone may love Pavin Smith's potential, but I'm not buying it. And clearly neither is ZiPS.
Yeah, ZiPS is also not buying it. This is true.
The second was Randall Grichuk. Now, this one's a little bit more of a stretch. He turned down a $6 million option. Mm-hmm. I have them signing Grichuk for 2 years, 14 guaranteed, with a third-year mutual option. So again, the Diamondbacks.
You love your mutual options, Jack. Everyone gets a mutual option.
Well, sure.
I'm gonna ask for a mutual option in my contract.
Piggybacking off of Mike Hazen, man.
Yeah,
he's smarter than me, so I'm going to go with that. But again, you're looking at 2 years, $6 million each year, or something like that, or $6 or $7 million, and then a buyout, so $14 million guaranteed. Mm-hmm. They were willing to pay him $6 million this past year, right? So do it again. Just add the extra year. Now, flipping back to ZiPS less of a believer in Grichuk's season last year. They only had a 709 OPS. But again, he never had such a high ratio of his plate appearances against left-hand pitching.
Right. And presumably the Diamondbacks could use him in that same way. Yeah.
So I'm confident that he can beat his projections based on that kind of breakdown. So if you're talking about guaranteeing Jock 16 average annual and Randall, 16 and Randall 7, now you're up to 23.
We've got 14 left to play with at that point. And I'm going to stop you right there, Jack, because we have to do a quick ad break here.
All right.
And then we'll get back to the second half of Jack's extraordinary plan for the Diamondbacks offseason. But real quick, I want to tell you all about Gila River Resorts and Casinos, which of course is where Derek Montilla probably is right now as we speak, if I know him. Shane, I'm told that they have roulette tables that light up, which feels pretty cool.
Yeah, they will tell you like the ball lands and whatever number it lands on, it'll like I don't know if it's spotlight, some magician magic, but the number on the table will light up and it just makes you feel. I've never felt so immersed than when I'm at Gila River Resorts and Casinos.
There you go. It's beautiful. Gila River Resorts and Casinos is also the origin of my fantasy football team. That's where we did our staff fantasy football draft. We live streamed it and the whole deal. And I'm currently vying for first place, Jack, in our staff fantasy football league, even though I know basically nothing about football. So anyway, if you want your fantasy football team to also be successful, maybe you should go to Gila River Resorts and Casinos too. You do you at Gila River Resorts and Casinos. Visit playatgila.com for more details. And speaking of Gila River Resorts and Casinos, we have a number of PHNX events there on the regular. I mentioned our staff fantasy football draft, which was open to the public, but we have some other exciting events coming up here that you can take part in. Our PHNX Territorial Cup Takeover is November 30th, presented by Neutral and Branded Bills. A pregame meetup we have going on at Bourbon Bent out in Tucson. Food and drink is included, as well as a game ticket to the Territorial Cup. Tickets are available for that over at gophnx.com/events. So be sure to get in on that if you have not already. Going back to Chicken and Pickle, we also have our PHNX Winter Pickleball Tournament taking place on December 14th. We doubled the field since our first tournament. We have 48 teams this year, which is outrageous. All skill levels are welcome, although I'm pretty sure that my skill level is probably not welcome. But
it is welcome.
It is welcome. Okay. Well, maybe it's welcome like at large with the tournament, but like it's not going to be welcome with my teammates, whoever those people happen to be. But it should be a fun event. We'll have PHNX prizes. We'll have food and drink specials there as well. And the proceeds are going to Operation Santa Claus, which is another great aspect of this event. Once again, you can find all the details for that and sign up at gophnx.com/events. And with that, let's go ahead and get back into it, Jack. Where were we?
Well, I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. A couple interesting comments I was reading as you were doing the promos. Alex D'Agostino, one of our writers on SI, mentions Grichuk's desire for more playing time. Said it feels like he wants a little bit more playing time. And that certainly is a factor. But he likes being in Arizona, and he likes money.
Yeah.
So, if they give him 214, say, come on back here, you're set for the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And, you can still get your 300 plate appearances in. I don't think that's an impediment for him. I think his market may be a little thinner than he might think. I could be wrong.
It really depends on to what extent are teams willing to buy into Grichuk against right-handed pitching. Right. And my inclination on that, which I've said before on the show, is I'm not sure teams are going to be willing to go there. His on-base percentage against righties was .274, I believe, in 2024. A lot of his production there was just because almost every hit he had was a home run or a double, and it really boosted that OPS. So we'll see, though. It'll be interesting to see what his market looks like.
And Cam also brought up a good point. If they trade an outfielder, that'll open up some more PAs for him as well. That
is a great point. Yeah.
So if the D-backs happen, you got to think sequentially here too, how some of this might go down. If they traded one of Thomas or McCarthy, right, after they dumped Jordan's salary, then they can turn around to Randall and say, well, we can get you up to 350 plate appearances or whatever.
Sure.
So, that's part of the potential areas there. So moving on. And again, I know you guys have talked about this, but it's not rocket science. Mike has said over and over that he wants a high leverage reliever. And there are two guys out there that are on the, potentially on the market. Devin Williams and Ryan Helsley.
Mm-hmm. We have discussed both at length.
And so trading for one of those two guys was part of my plan. It's hard to know what the other teams. I mean, look, when you say, hey, what would it take to get Ryan Helsley? I mean, if you're Mike Hazen, that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
And they turn around and they give you, Jake McCarthy and Gilbert Diaz. Well, Mike's not going to do that. And it just depends if there's conversation to be had there. Sometimes it dies on the vine. Sometimes it keeps going. But if they can do that financially, it fits.
Sure.
It definitely fits financially. It's just a matter, can they deal from their strength? Is there a starting pitcher or an outfielder that they're willing to give up that is enough to entice bringing in a Devin Williams or a Helsley?
Well, apparently they have this great excess of quality starting pitching depth now, according to
exactly.
ZiPS. So, I mean, they might as well trade 2 starters with all these guys that they have, right?
And Mike's saying, he's been getting hit on, all 6 of his primary starting pitchers. So if he believes in any of these projections on the next line of 6 guys, then it might make him a little bit more willing to move somebody besides Montgomery from those top 6. The other factor, of course, is that the Cardinals look to be doing some kind of a reset, rebuild, retool, whatever you want to call it.
They're definitely looking to get younger for sure.
That's probably actually a greater possibility. In the article, I put Devin Williams, but Helsley seems like he's a better fit.
Yeah, maybe a better, because the Brewers, you figure, are trying to compete again in 2025, whereas the Cardinals are, they're not necessarily tearing it all down, but they're trying to get younger. They're clearly targeting, I would think, different things in a trade than the Brewers at this point.
Right. If you've done those first 3 moves, right? If you've brought back Jock and you brought back Randall, you've brought back a sizable chunk of your power, which I don't expect them to hit as well as last year. And projections certainly say that, but I expect them to hit better than the young players that they might try to fill in with if they don't bring those guys back.
Well, surely you're about to bring Christian Walker back.
We'll get to that.
The cherry on top, right?
Now you get down, so you add in, I actually put $9 million in my article, but it's probably actually closer to 8. So if you $8 to $9 million to bring in one of these closers, now or Ryan Presley, maybe you don't have to absorb all his $14 million salary, right? Maybe you make a deal with Houston.
I would hope not for Ryan Presley.
Yeah, but I mean, he's another guy that could fill that role if you could work out the money aspect of it.
Sure. Yeah, Helsley and Williams are shooting at the top of the market, maybe unnecessarily so. And they also, the fact that they each only have 1 year of club control, I'm a little skeptical that Mike Hazen goes down that road. We don't see Mike trade for guys with 1 year of club control very often, especially guys who are going to cost as much as I think those guys would.
Right. Now, in this world, it does actually result in Pavin Smith playing a fair amount of first base and being, the strong half of the platoon. And they're going to need a right-handed bat. And I got a chance to chat with our friend Bob Nightingale. And I asked his opinion. I said, Bob's really keyed in, by the way. I know you guys like to make a lot of fun of him for typos on Twitter and all that, but he is a great guy, and he's really locked in with a lot of people in Major League Baseball. And I learn a lot sitting around the lunch tables with him and the scouts and people, at Chase Field. And so don't just discount Bob Nightingale's input because he makes a typo on Twitter. Great guy. But anyway, talking to him, I said, how do you think the market's going to develop? And, he felt like, sure, with pitchers, especially starting pitchers, you're going to see a little quicker action than last year. But the opportunity to pick up a guy late for a little bit more financial, lower financial terms, I think is still there when it comes to hitters. So, guys like Justin Turner, maybe bringing back Josh Bell.
Sure.
Perhaps
Carlos Santana, maybe.
Well, your dream is Santana. I think he's going to cost a little bit more than you're hoping.
Santana is on paper the perfect platoon partner because he's a switch hitter, but he really just destroys lefties. That's kind of his calling card, and you really like the idea of that next to Pavin Smith.
Could be a guy like Mark Canha. Somebody along those lines to come in and basically hit left-hand pitching and play a little first base. And somebody like Josh Bell, because he's a switch hitter, I can see him having to accept a 1 year, $5 or $6 million deal, maybe 7. So I see him being affordable. I see Justin Turner. I took a closer look at Justin Turner. I mean, oh my God, 40 years old, right? But
he just hits, man.
His underlying numbers, the batted ball metrics look okay to me.
Yeah.
Have you dove into those?
Yeah, well, I know that. I mean, with Justin Turner, his calling card is always just that the quality of the at bat is so good, and he's not impacting the ball a whole lot at this stage in his career, at least as far as I'm aware. But when you draw a ton of walks and you're seeing a bunch of pitches, like, you can still be a pretty valuable player, even if you're not hitting for much power anymore.
Then the next part of the plan I had, it's no longer viable, was try to bring Kevin Newman back for 1 year, $3 million. They hit that number, right? The Angels signed him for 2.75. Mike Hazen again said, "Look, I'm not going to bring Justin Lawler up here to sit on the bench and start twice a week." Based on the projections that we're looking at, neither him or Blaze really looked like a guy that you're going to be able to plug in there with all that much confidence, right?
Yeah, well, real quick, we are coming up on the 2 o'clock marker here, so I just want to tell everyone watching on TV to be sure to join us over on gophnx.com, where we are going to continue the conversation because Jack's evil plan is not quite complete just yet, so be sure to join us there. Yes, Kevin Newman, that's a little bit more complicated now that the Diamondbacks, unless they're going to trade for Kevin Newman after the Angels signed him, that seems a little bit complicated. So, they're going to have to go, I guess, a different route in that regard. And I do think, as we discussed on our show yesterday, that's a decent loss. Like, Kevin Newman was a really valuable player for the Diamondbacks last year, even though he was more of a utility type.
And then actually just bring it home with Christian Walker. Bottom line is he's going to cost over $20 million a year average annual.
Yeah.
We started off with $37 million to spend. You're going to give 2/3 of your spending budget to Christian Walker.
With a DH situation that would feel very non-ideal at that point. So, I guess the question in my head is, like, what's the marginal value difference? Do you get more out of paying the DH platoon over what your alternatives would look like at that position, or do you get more out of paying Christian Walker over what your alternatives look like there? And I think I'm with you that if you can kind of piecemeal a first base situation with Pavin and a Carlos Santana or Justin Turner, whoever that is, you could maybe see that, like, those guys combined not being the same as Christian Walker, but being sort of similar at least. Whereas without Jock Peterson at DH, it's just not going to be nearly the asset that it was in 2024. We can recreate them in the aggregate. Correct. I'm so glad that you said that, Jack. You just became so much cooler.
The other thing to note about Randall Grichuk is only half his plate appearances came at DH.
Sure.
He's going to play outfield, and he's still a league average outfielder. So they'll still be able to use him in the outfield. There'll be plenty of times where they're going to move Ketel Marte to go DH against left-hand pitching.
Right.
And throw an infielder in at second base. So,
yeah.
There's going to be other right-handed. Lourdes is going to play DH once in a while, get him off his feet. So some of those DH at-bats against left-handed pitching don't necessarily have to go to Randall Grichuk. He can go play in the outfield too.
So in summary, you are trading Jordan Montgomery to someone and trying to save half of his contract. So you're saving $11 million there. You are re-signing Jock Peterson to a 2-year, $32 million deal with a 3rd-year mutual option. You are re-signing Randall Grichuk for $2 and $14 with a 3rd-year mutual option. You are trading for Devin Williams, or I guess it could be Ryan Helsley, someone like that. And then you are signing a right-handed platoon first baseman, one of those guys that we mentioned. Maybe you could get someone like that for around $5 million. And then you are letting Christian Walker go. And in terms of a utility role, we don't really know. What does that look like without Kevin Newman? It feels like the Diamondbacks might have to make some other move in order to fill that spot.
Right.
Yeah. It's a 115 win team, right? Pretty clearly.
I think that team's a 90 win team easily.
Yeah.
And especially with such a strong bullpen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this Diamondbacks team is going to look pretty different in 2025. I guess not that different. I mean, if they went the route that you're suggesting, they actually look fairly similar. If you're bringing back Jock and Randall, then your first base situation looks a little different. You have a new closer. Outside of that, it's a pretty similar roster. So it should be interesting to see how all of this plays out. that is just about all that we have here on this edition of the PHNX D-Backs show. Jack, I want to give you a chance to plug all of your things here real quick before we go.
Well, just visit us at si.com/MLB/Diamondbacks. It's Arizona Diamondbacks on SI. In addition to myself, we have Alex DeCasino, Aaron Hughes, Jake Oliver.
You guys have an army.
Yeah, we got, I have 3 excellent writers that, we put out a lot of good content. We are not a rumor mill. I don't follow it, every single rumor, but we do analyze guys that are potential good fits. And we report the news. We follow prospects deeply.
Yeah.
And, I work closely with Jesse every day in the press box, and we talk every day. And it's a pleasure to be here on the show. So thanks.
Yeah. Well, what you guys have witnessed here over the last hour is basically what happens in the press box with me and Jack, like every single day for 6 months. So somehow we're not totally sick of each other. I guess we had a little bit of a break there for a few weeks, and now we're ready to talk ball again. But yes, thank you to all of you who spent your afternoon with us here on the PHNX D-Backs show. Really appreciate your support. As always, you can give us a follow on all of the social media platforms. You can find me at Jesse and Friedman. You can find Jack at ShoeWizard59, if I'm not mistaken, which I imagine you're also there on Blue Sky now as well. So if you're a Blue Sky person, you can find Jack on that platform as well. Our beat account over on Twitter is at PHNX_D-Backs, but of course, all roads lead to at PHNX_sports. That's on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you again to all of you for joining us here on this Friday afternoon. We hope you have an outstanding weekend. And remember, kids, baseball is fun, but it's so much more fun when Dan Szymborski's ZiPS computers run the entire universe.
We all silly like the mayor.